So after 11 years, John Rambo returns to cinemas in a film that's kind of really dividing a lot of audiences and critics. So let's see what I think about Rambo: Last Blood. Vietnam War veteran John Rambo tries to find some semblance of peace by raising horses on a ranch in Arizona. He's also developed a special familial bond with a woman named Maria and her teenage granddaughter, Gabriela. But when a vicious Mexican cartel kidnaps Gabriela while trying to find her estranged father, Rambo crosses the border on a bloody and personal quest to rescue her and punish those responsible. So for the fifth time in 37 years, Sylvester Stallone steps in the role of John Rambo here in a film released here on September 20th of 2019, and it was such an interesting thing to see this entire journey of this entire franchise, starting out with the fantastic First Blood, still one of the best action films ever made, has such a wonderful, serious, gritty, energetic tone to it, but such a depth to it as well. Next two films of the franchise definitely amped things up, made things a little bit more spectacular in a certain way. The second film, definitely very cartoonish. Third film, very weak in the story in certain places, but still had a satisfying quality as an action film itself. But the fourth film definitely brought things a lot further back down to earth and brought back the serious reflection on the tone and the soul of John Rambo and everything he went through, and kind of brought him a little bit kind of full circle in a certain way at the end of the film, bringing him back to America, bringing him back home to where he grew up and everything. Felt like a nice, solid, sort of closed-ended type of thing in a certain way that just felt like you could end this series there and be very satisfying. But as I said in my review of that film that I just posted on the site here and everything, that there was this idea before they landed on the entire story in Burma there for the fourth film of Rambo going down to Mexico to kind of bring back a beloved one that had gotten hooked up into a lot of bad things down there and everything. So there ended up being a story a long time ago to kind of develop it and kind of get to that point where you felt like Rambo could be in that place after you got the story told, to bring him back home and have this sort of story unfold in a certain way. So it was a certain thing that it was on, then was off, then was on again. So it's a really interesting type of thing that was kind of stalled out in development where it wasn't going to happen. Then they decided to go ahead with it anyway. As I said in the intro here, the reviews for the film and raw reactions from it have been very split across the board here, where some people absolutely hate the film. They absolutely hate Last Blood. Some people really like it. I've seen some people who think it's an awesome film. My opinions are very varied in this type of way, and it's like, I don't think, in my opinion, it's a bad film. But there are certain flaws of the film, there's certain shortcomings, and one of the main things I kind of felt watching the film is like, this doesn't feel like a film that it has to include John Rambo. It doesn't feel like it's a Rambo story. It feels like a story that Rambo happens to be involved with. It's not a film that really explores his character. It doesn't, like the fourth film did, reflect back on his character, where he had been, and kind of move him forward in a certain way. It's not a thing that really kind of grapples with. I mean, it has elements where he has certain PTSD, and he has certain viewpoints about how black the hearts of men can be and how dangerous the world can be out there, but it's not a film that's so specifically written that it has to involve this character. And it's not a fault of Stallone, because Stallone does a fantastic performance here. He still maintains all these great qualities of the character, that he's still a very troubled psyche, very troubled in all these type of things, that all the stuff that he went through in all these other films that we've seen and stuff before that in Vietnam doesn't just wash away because he comes back home. All that stuff still is part of his internal makeup of who he is and everything, so they still maintain a link towards that. But it just feels like you've got the first four films that tell certain stories, certain ones are stronger than others, but they have certain things that kind of say about themselves a little bit, and certainly have important moments in progression of his character throughout his life. This feels like kind of a tagged on sort of story in a certain way. It's like all these other big important things happen in his life, and then like this other sort of story happened later on that is kind of important to his life, but doesn't feel like it takes advantage of who the character of Rambo is. Again, a lot of people have been saying that's very much a kind of a more bloodthirsty allegory towards like the Liam Neeson film Taken. You can definitely see that. In a way, it does fit that. It's a straightforward sort of revenge film, But again, it just feels kind of, you can understand all the actions that Rambo takes in this whole thing, because obviously all these things are happening because he cares so much for this one girl, the sort of small family kind of found when he came back home, and kind of how all these things kind of reawaken himself, being someone who could care again for a certain amount of people in his life. But it's always been the thing in the franchise so much that he's never been to one to strike out and take the first blood, as it were. He was always someone who struck back against things, who fought for a certain ideal. Revenge was really never quite the sort of thing that drove him in a way. So it's a very different dynamic, a very different psychological dichotomy of the character explored in this film, where he's much more driven by rage and anger and vengeance and everything. So it's a very different thing to kind of digest for the character of John Rambo here. So Stallone could have done this film without it being John Rambo, is kind of what I'm getting at, that it could have been an original character made up, that he still starred in this film, but it wasn't really Rambo. It could have been any kind of different character, because it doesn't exactly take those elements of who Rambo has been after 4 films and really kind of just amplifies and kind of utilizes those qualities of the character to really kind of make the story so much about what he's been through and what he is and all these different things. But I can say that the cast is really well put together here. I think everyone does a pretty good job with everything that they're given. But a lot of the characters do feel very underdeveloped in the film. I didn't think they spent enough time or did enough effort to really lay enough emotional groundwork with these characters in Rambo's life to really feel that much for them when all these horrible things start to happen in the film, because a few light beats at the beginning of the film just establish relationships and get the plot moving and stuff like that, but there's not substance there. There's not enough stuff dug into the heart and core of the film to really kind of feel that much about the characters, despite being put in horrible situations. I just didn't feel like there was enough there to really kind of impact me as the film went on. As things started happening to these characters, I really felt like I should be feeling a lot more for them, but it didn't really happen. And same thing with the villains. They're very well portrayed, but they're also very stock. There's nothing really that distinguishes them amongst all the other gun-toting henchmen in the film. They kind of blend into the scenery, when this franchise has some fantastic characters, has some fantastic villains too, that there's so many different things that you've had built up and they impacted you on a certain level, and they had a certain, whether it was charisma or they had an intimidation factor or whatever the heck it was, there were certain things with these characters that built up to make them poignant to the story and have a certain impact on the audience. This one just feels like it's so, on a screenplay level, just kind of middling. It's a little bit mediocre. It's a little bit rushed in some of its points in the film. A lot of things just kind of go along and kind of hit beats too quickly and kind of wrap things up a little too fast to kind of get the plot moving just from A to B to C really, really fast. And so it's just like, it feels like it's just a rushed sort of screenplay in terms of how it's progressing things. It doesn't take its time, despite the fact that it doesn't run any longer than pretty much any other film in the franchise. It's pretty much the same length as all the other ones, but it just feels like there's not enough time spent economically with these characters and all these different things to really kind of get the depth of everything that you need to have the resonance when things blow up in the third act of the film. And that's mainly where all the action is centralized in the film. You get a few little punch-ups earlier, a few little slicey-dicey things that Rambo does to people, but it does kind of feel a little anticlimactic to me, unfortunately, that, again, the bad guys are very interchangeable. They really kind of blend in the scenery. They don't stand out and distinguish themselves to really make them as deplorable as anyone else in the film. And also because I already saw Rambo do such horrible goddamn things to people already in this film before you get to the climax, that a few bows and arrows and a few gunshots, a couple explosions just seem underwhelming towards all that other much more grisly stuff he already done in the film, that feels just kind of disproportionate, that you get much more horrible, terrible, violent things that he does earlier in the film than everything else, just kind of regular type of action movie stuff. Again, it's all well shot, it's all well choreographed. It just feels like the screenplay is lackluster. Again, there's not enough that grit into the characters. There's not enough depth and nuance into everything else to really drag those elements into the forefront and really make that stuff kind of come alive in a very dimensional type of fashion to the entire film. But of course, Brian Tyler doing the score in this whole film really does bring a lot of texture, a lot of beauty to this whole thing. Again, bringing back Goldsmith's themes, doing another fantastic job after he did pick it up from Goldsmith in the fourth film. it brings it all back around and brings together a fantastic, amazing score that I just absolutely loved every nuance. Little thing he did, this whole thing just absolutely beautiful, touching in so many ways. Just part of the legacy of this franchise that Goldsmith started all the way back in 1982. That stuff is wonderful in the whole film, but it's one of those things where it's like I'm just kind of in the middle about the thing, a little bit more towards the good side of it, because there is good stuff. Stallone's still putting on fantastic performance of this whole thing. There's nothing bad with the quality of the action, the quality of the editing, quality of the cinematography here, but it just comes down to the foundation that is the screenplay and the whole thing that just kind of fails everything else from what I saw on the screen here. That if there ends up being some sort of extended cut for this thing and adds in more scenes and adds in more depth and more nuance, it'll definitely be worth re-examination. But on opening weekend here, all I have is this cut of the film to look at, this evidence to have, and it just feels like there's just not enough. There's not enough to get into the thick of things, to really have everything pay off, because there's not enough emotional substance driven into the core of the whole film to really kind of get that out of it, that every single film this franchise has had a different sort of impact in a certain way, whereas the gritty emotional depth of the first film, the sort of cartoonish stuff in the second film, where there are still good characters there to get off of, but there's so many other little things in Rambo 3 that are really kind of cool in a certain way. You have fantastic things that you're going off and saving his best friend in this whole franchise. The fourth film has all these wonderful little complex elements that kind of reflect and go back and see how Rambo has kind of dealt with all these different things in his life and come full circle. This one just doesn't have those elements where you kind of look at the character and have something that means something more poignant to his journey here. So I can understand the little elements, the sort of ideas they had in the thing, but it just didn't have the depth and the dimension to really kind of grab all those little threads pulled into make it an emotionally raw type of story here. So I'd like to hear your comments on this, guys, because again, opinions are on different ends of the spectrum. I'm a little bit more, again, in the middle towards this better side of things, but I'd just like to hear what all you guys have to say, go back and forth, because if you hate it, I can certainly understand it, because some people are just not going to like the gratuitous, gory violence of this film when the story just doesn't hold up as well. Some people will absolutely love it because it's so unrelenting in its gore and all the violence and everything. So just discuss it. Let me know what you think. We'll be back with some other good stuff very soon. So thanks much, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.